Have you ever paid for dinner with a bullet? In some parts of the Imperium of Man, that's perfectly normal. What does money look like in the grim darkness of the far future? In the Imperium, 1,000,000 worlds stretched across the galaxy, there's no single currency, no universal system of value, and definitely no economic plan. You'll find thrones, scrip, shells, bullets, even sacred IOUs, all depending on where you are and who's in charge. But despite the chaos, the Imperium still runs, bills are paid, tithes are collected, and goods somehow change hands. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the strange, broken, and brutally inconsistent currency of the Imperium of Man, and what it can tell us about value, control, and survival. Let's get started. I think we should start with the basics. The Imperium of Man consists of over 1,000,000 worlds, with at least as many different cultures, if not many more. There is no way to maintain a single economic model over such a vast and disparate area. In our own world, it can be difficult to compare economies from region to region or from country to country. So we can imagine that comparing economies over an entire galaxy would be almost impossible. So let's start with the smallest scale we can imagine. Then we can take it from there. There are plenty of societies and cultures within the Imperium that have reverted over time to pre-industrial levels of technology and social cohesion. Some of these worlds have systems of government more similar to medieval Europe, and others more primitive still. When we think about earlier periods of history and their economics, we often think of different individuals, be they traders or otherwise, even groups and communities, all exchanging goods and services through systems of barter. I am of course generalizing here, but I think that's what most of us would imagine, and it's more than likely what the writers of Games Workshop imagined when they were writing about these places to begin with. The myth of communities using barter as a means of exchange really originates with Adam Smith and his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations. Alright lads, we're getting into it, okay? This book is one of the most influential things ever written, and it's usually regarded as the basis of modern economic theory and thought. Basically, the idea is that if money doesn't exist, then there must be some sort of mechanism of exchange and valuation of goods and services. If I produce one kind of goods, let's just say bread, and my neighbour produces shoes or something, I would give an equal or agreed amount of my bread for the shoes that they make, and that would be a set amount for both parties. The problem with this idea of barter economies is that it was really written by people who had no experience of a world without money. Adam Smith was definitely a brilliant guy and described the economic system of his time quite well. I don't think there's any way to argue against that. But we're all blind to experiences beyond our own. More recent anthropologists have started to disagree with Smith. Anthropologists like David Graeber. Oh god, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. It's honestly worse than a lot of names from 40k. In Debt, the First 5,000 Years, David suggested that bartering only really occurred between strangers and not people within the same community. The more common thing that was found within real-world communities that had no history of money was a sort of credit system. People would just give to their neighbours what was needed, and they would get back what was needed by them in return, at least for the most part. I'm sure we've all had experiences of this, even in what can, for many, be the depths and despair of the modern, all-consuming, global, hegemonic, totalitarian, and at times grim-dark economic system that we all live in. Over here in Ireland, one example that I think a lot of us will be familiar with is rounds in pubs. Of course, I'm going to talk a bit about pubs in Ireland, being from here. If any of you ever visit Ireland and get into a round of drinks with the people here, make sure to buy a round back. That's the custom. If somebody buys you a drink, you reciprocate. And let me tell you, if you forget or don't for whatever reason, however legitimate it might seem, people will remember. And it can take years for your reputation to recover. Now, obviously, talking about pubs in Ireland is a little niche, but I'm sure many of you listening to this have similar experiences of your own. When you're interacting with your community, your family, there are usually at least a few times when money just doesn't enter into things. In a place like the Imperium of Man, where resources necessary to live can be hard to find for the majority of people, relying on your own local community in a way beyond money is something that is surely a necessity for many people to survive. Now, just another quick digression here. I will be talking about the concept of resources and imperial access to them in another video, But be it on a primeval death world covered in dense jungles filled with Tyrannosaurus analogues, on a world that Joan of Arc would find familiar, or even kilometres below the surface of a world beneath a towering ancient hive city, there are surely countless billions in the Imperium who live in communities that would not have access to even simple forms of money like we would understand it. And I say good for them. In a lot of ways, they might be just some of the luckiest humans to live in the Warhammer 40k universe. They have no concept of just how badly they're being exploited and can't even bring themselves to comprehend just how overpriced Games Workshop's products can be. How would they interact with the wider Imperial economy? They are Imperial citizens after all, and that means that they have commitments to support their Emperor and his armies. So probably, whatever surplus value they create would be given over to another community, planetary body, or directly to the Imperial government. This is where barter would likely come into things. On Fenris, for example, the homeworld of the Space Wolves chapter of Space Marines, different indigenous tribes are given the rights to live on better quality land, nearer the Space Marines headquarters. This is in exchange for providing goods and recruits to the chapter or as a service for the performance of a great deed, like we see in the novel Wolf Time by Gav Thorpe. One of the most infamous examples of the Imperium interacting with cultures like this was on Unloth. I'm quoting here from the Lexicanum. The Imperial governor convinced the local tribes to mine and smelt metals to be sacrificed at sky temples. Over the course of 11 years, enough raw material was collected in this way to complete construction of the Lord Daros, a lunar-class cruiser, at which point the tribes were treated to the sight of a new star moving across the sky as the ship ignited its plasma drives and flew out of the system. In many cases, not just these, the Imperium or its representatives convinced the locals who have no understanding of the wider galaxy to contribute toward the greater Imperial economy. In many cases, they will get something in return. It might be protection against dangerous mutations or outside invasion. It might even just be the validation that these people are doing what they must for the benefit of their god. If you want to learn more about how the Imperium uses propaganda like this, I have a video on the subject linked below. Strangely enough, this idea of barter and the barter myth can actually get quite controversial, so let's just move on to something completely different. Money. So, there's no real single currency used throughout the entire Imperium. You'll find reference to multiple different currencies throughout the setting, depending on the region and time period. There are Aquila pieces mentioned in some stories, in others you'll hear about crowns and credits, but the most common currency mentioned in the setting is the throne gelt, sometimes just known as throne or thrones. These are mentioned in a variety of novels and stories, and like pretty much everything in Warhammer 40,000, there is precious little in the way of consistency. But they are mentioned in a good amount of detail in the rulebook for Dark Heresy. This was a tabletop RPG created by Games Workshop in 2008 and describes an area called the Calixis sector in great detail. As an RPG, it also goes into great lengths to describe how your character interacts with the world around them, including how they purchase goods and gear. Firstly, thrones can take many different forms, from seashells right through to precious metals and digitized currency. There are multiple different nicknames and forms of Imperial thrones, used on different worlds and even regions. I am not going to go into them all. One notable one that I'll just mention really quick though, in the depths of a place called Gunmetal City, the money used is called rounds, and they take the form of actual bullets. It's one of the most Warhammer pieces of lore I've come across in quite a while. But how far can you stretch your rounds, thrones, or whatever you have to hand? Let's talk about how Imperial citizens interact with their economy. I'm going to go back to the Dark Heresy rulebook for this. We obviously can't go into any real detail on the countless currencies used across the galaxy, but for the purposes of this overview, we will just count the Calixis sector as an average enough region of Imperial space. It goes into some detail on the prices of different goods and services available to different strata of Imperial citizenry. First up, food. A cheap meal would cost around 1 throne. An average meal would cost about 5, while a lavish feast would cost about 40. Accommodation is obviously a little different and more expensive. A single night of cheap digs would set you back about 5 thrones. An average room would cost about 20, and luxurious accommodation would be 100. For transport, a single journey for the poorest of commuters in the Imperium would be about 1 throne, 20 for a journey of average comfort, and 150 for the more expensive. There are costs mentioned for other things too. A trip to the doctor or a medical servitor would average out at about 150 thrones. If you want to go to a skilled physician, you're going to have to pay out about 500. A globe would cost you about 15 thrones, a backpack costs about 10, a cup of recaf or coffee would cost a shocking 5 thrones. It's always going up, it's terrible. There are also interesting prices for weapons too in the book. If you want to buy a bow, you shouldn't in the 41st millennium, but you might have no other choice. It would cost you 10 thrones. A flintlock pistol would also be a terrible idea, but it would cost the same. If you wanted to expand your price range a bit, a basic lasgun costs 75 thrones, with a las pistol costing 50. You could also go for a different price point and spend 4,000 thrones on a plasma pistol. If you ever get the chance, I'd highly recommend just reading through the rulebook for Dark Heresy. It's one of the best sources for 40k lore and gives an amazing amount of context and detail for all sorts of things. I'd love to get a physical copy of it for myself. Now, the prices I've mentioned are all well and good, but they don't really mean much without knowing what people earn. For the lowest hive scum and labourers, the average monthly income would be about 20 to 30 thrones. A regular guardsman would make about 50, adepts and bureaucrats would make about 100, while a member of the high-ranking elite imperial nobility would make about 500 thrones per month. Obviously, I think these figures aren't the best when describing the imperial economy. Firstly, I think the average noble would make far more than just 25 times the income of sub-hive scum. An example from reality. In 2020, Jeff Bezos made about $597,360 for every $1 earned by the average Amazon warehouse worker. Now, I'm not here to tell you if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would just imagine that the wealth disparity in the Imperium would be more extreme than that, or anything that we have any good source for. But it's fairly typical of Games Workshop to be vague about these things. Not only because it has to when creating lore for such a varied place as the Imperium, but also because it's just a lot of fun to speculate about. Also, the sheer amount of different types of money is a great representation for how diverse and difficult to administer a place the Imperium is. All of these different forms of currency, and many more besides, are collectively used as representations of value. Traders and Imperial agents going from place to place will often have to have a good idea of the exchange rate between them. In researching this, I came across what I think is actually one of the most well thought through pieces of Imperial lore written by Games Workshop. In order for something to be considered a throne, it has to be backed by the Imperial government. In reality, currencies generally are not backed by precious metals anymore. They used to be. Instead, today, currencies are usually backed by a government decree and have no intrinsic value. You cannot eat money to live. Money only has value to us because we trust that it does, and this is enforced through governmental regulation. This is referred to as fiat currency. The Imperium does functionally the same thing. Thrones, credits, rounds, and all the countless forms that imperial currency takes doesn't often have any intrinsic value. Instead, they are backed by the local imperial government. Thrones and fiat currency are based upon the value of the local imperial tithe. The tithe is one of the most important parts of the imperial government system. It is the tax that each world must pay to the Golden Throne of Terra and the Emperor of Mankind. There are very few worlds in the Imperium that have the tithe grade of none, which means that they are exempt. These would be worlds that have been devastated by Exterminatus, Space Marine homeworlds, Adeptus Mechanicus Forge worlds, and a few others. While these worlds are often exempt from the main Imperial tithe, they might have to supply the Imperial government with other resources. Like in the case of Space Marine homeworlds, they will have to supply gene seed to the Terran government. Tithing is known by many names throughout the Imperium. Terra's Due, the Great Harvesting, the Grand Tithe, etc. The Departamento Administratum is the body that oversees this vitally important part of imperial bureaucracy. The Administratum is one of the most important parts of the imperial government, and fully deserves a video at some point. They have representatives on every imperial world and will administer both the assessment of each world's tithing commitment and its payment. The governor of each world's main duty is overseeing the smooth collection of their world's tithe. The Imperium doesn't care what form of government is present on their worlds, provided the planet's commitments are met. There are a couple of main forms of Imperial Tithe. The first is a military one. It requires 1/10 of the local planetary defense forces being recruited into the Imperial Guard to serve on one of the countless battlefronts across the galaxy. The other form of tithe is called the exacta, and is different from world to world. On a feudal world, the tithe would obviously be quite low, while more advanced hive worlds would obviously be required to supply the Imperium with much more stuff. And this stuff can come in any form: food, weapons, minerals, consumer goods, even people. In the novel Lords of Excess by Rich McCormick, we see the world of Serene. It has been cut off from the wider Imperium due to the opening of the Great Rift. The main tithe contribution is a particular crop that grows in abundance on the planet. This crop is used as an ingredient for certain rejuvenant treatments. These are medical treatments used by the Imperial elite to prolong their natural human lifespan and to counter the effects of aging. The entire ecology, economy, and culture for many people on this world ultimately revolved around this planet's capacity to produce a specific good that would be useful to a selection of the wealthiest Imperial citizens. It was also something that they would rarely, if ever, use themselves. In fact, whole planetary cultures have evolved around the payment of this tithe. On Vestroia, every firstborn son is recruited into their Imperial Guard regiments. Other worlds press gang workers into becoming crew for the Imperial Navy. If a planetary governor is seen as failing in their duty to supply or gather the tithe, they will usually be executed by representatives of the Imperial government. While this justice can be slow, it will be final. There are difficulties that come with these collections, however. The sheer size of the Imperium makes any sort of bureaucracy like this difficult to manage, and mistakes are inevitable. Then, there are the ever-present perils of warp travel that also make communication and transport difficult at the best of times. There are worlds that have been forced to pay a much greater sum than they are able, simply due to errors by a bureaucrat or the Imperium having out-of-date information and thinking they were capable of delivering more than was possible. But that never matters. Tithes are graded on a scale from none right up to experima. I think that's how you pronounce that. That's the highest level, beyond even extremis. It's difficult to tell exactly what these different levels mean when it comes to giving an exact measurement. I think these tithe grades can be better seen as ways of defining how important a specific world is to the wider Imperium. There are other forms of tithe that don't really fit well into this grading system. I've already mentioned the requirement of Space Marine chapters to supply the Administratum with gene seed. The Sisters of Silence are an organisation made up of psychically blank warriors that are some of the Imperium's best weapons in its fight against the forces of chaos and the warp. They have been known to gather recruits from any world, including those that would otherwise be exempt. These peerless warriors are also the main force that the Imperium uses to crew its mighty fleet of black ships. This fleet of black ships that ploughs the stars of the Milky Way is the second biggest fleet in the Imperium after the Imperial Merchant Fleet. And I'll talk about them another time. Now, these black ships are not to be confused with inquisitorial black ships, which are used for the more general administration of the Emperor's judgment. The League of Black Ships is technically operated by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, who are in charge of managing, recruiting, and training the Imperium's population of psychers. These are individuals who have psychic powers, which are drawn from the warp. This is the alternate hellish dimension that Imperial ships will delve into in order to travel faster than light. Again, I want to talk about warp travel and its impacts on the Imperial economy in a separate video. The black ships are some of the best constructed vessels available to the Imperium, built with the finest technology of the Adeptus Mechanicus and crewed with specially selected and psychically dulled or blank individuals. These ships will go on established routes around Imperial space. Every world in the Imperium will be visited by these ships at least once per century for the tithe of psychically gifted individuals. When their cargo holds are full, they will return to Terra. If the psychers collected by these ships are young enough, they might become inquisitors or mighty space marine librarians. Some will become Primaris battle psychers for the Imperial Guard. Many will become astropaths used for interstellar communication. More still will be given to the Emperor. Every day, Thousands of psychically gifted individuals from all over the galaxy are sacrificed to the Emperor to ensure his continued survival. Their very souls, connected as they are to the warp, are used to fuel the golden throne that keeps him alive. And this is the real currency of the Imperium: human life. The most extreme example of the need to maintain a positive balance, and indeed to treat human life as a currency, is the golden throne and the Emperor that it sustains. Without the Emperor, this esoteric device would simply stop working. The Astronomicon, which guides human ships through the warp, would stop, and the Imperium itself would functionally cease to exist as an interstellar empire. The Emperor is also holding closed the warp rift beneath the golden throne. Without him, the forces of hell itself would flow out and destroy the homeworld of humanity. The Imperium treats these psychers like a currency. They are earned from the hard work of imperial bureaucrats in exchange for more time for the Emperor and the continuation of his existence. But it goes beyond this. A main function of the Tithe is the collection of people to be used in the never-ending wars the Imperium finds itself embroiled in. It's not just the lives of these rare, gifted individuals that are treated like coins, but the common masses of people too. This is one of the most dehumanizing aspects of the main human faction in Warhammer 40k. The Emperor's life, and thus the continuation of the Imperium itself, can be counted by the number of psychers that are delivered to the throne room. The potential success of Imperial battlefronts are measured in the availability of human lives to throw at the countless enemies of mankind. Though this is awful, there are precedents to this sort of currency in the real world too. This ledger-like approach to human life is taken directly from history. During great conflicts, but especially the First World War, any potential success was measured by the sheer numbers of people that different countries could throw at each other. Indeed, one of the most popular guard regiments, the Death Corps of Krieg, is based on a lot of what I've already mentioned. Their aesthetic is heavily influenced by French soldiers from the First World War, and their world's commitment to the Imperial Tithe is measured in the millions of soldiers it can muster. So, from bullets to psychers being burned as fuel, the Imperium's currency is built on human life. It mirrors our own systems of exchange, but cranked to a scale so horrifying, it becomes satire. And like with so many things in Warhammer 40,000, that is exactly the point. These systems exist to justify the Imperium, but they also hold up a very grim and dark mirror to our own world. There's a lot more to explore here, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. This is the first video in a series I'm creating on the Imperial economy, so if you want to dive deeper, hit like and subscribe. That way you will know when the next one drops. Until then, thanks again to everyone who's already subscribed. I genuinely appreciate the support, and I'll see you in the next one.